All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Robert Lunz Group Sierra Club monthly meeting. Let me get this off the screen before I go any further. Okay. All right. So I can't see the slides at all. How far can I walk and you still see me?
Still good for me to hear from me.
Okay.
I can still see it.
Well, I mean at home. Sorry.
Yes, I can't actually see you, Christine, but I can see the room.
Can you see me behind the podium now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I see what you see now. All right. Well, I will have to speak to the slides a little bit. So anyway, we've got 1,400 members in Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester, and Colleton counties, and I'm going to have to speak to the slide because I can't remember all these things. We're on the traditional lands of the Ashtu, Awadot, Siwi, Bohicket, Catawba, Combahee, Coosa, Edisto, Itiwan, Kiowa, Pidi, Stem, Soto, Wando, Waku, Wama, Wasamasa, and Winya nations. Boy, I need to like practice that a million times before I get up here, I think. And our mission is to explore, enjoy, and protect the planet. All right. So this is our leadership, our volunteer leadership. Several of us are in the room, and we've got a couple positions open, political chair, and we've got conservation chair open. If you're interested, obviously the politics is getting geared up for an election, very soon. And we will need some help, we can make endorsements for local candidates. We can work with our state and make endorsements for state candidates. So if you're interested in helping us do that, let us know. And then on the conservation side, obviously there are plenty of things to conserve in the low country, our trees being one of them. They're under attack. So we could definitely use some help with that. So if you're interested, let us know. All right, outings, Star. You want to tell us about all these great outings?
So we're going to do a variety of things in the month of March. Beginning on the 16th, we'll go to the Santee National Wildlife Refuge, and we will ride some bicycles that you will bring with you around the wildlife refuge there, and see a large Indian mound and have a good time. And the Sierra Club biggest fundraiser of the year is oysters. And on the 22nd of the month, Amanda Bogus is going to lead a workshop on making a wire reef oyster reef restoration. This is like step 1, and step 2, they'll be later in the year, they'll take those out and put them in the water somewhere. So we're paying the oysters back slowly, but we're trying. On the 23rd, this is a longish bike trip. It'll be about 30 miles, give or take. It's basically flat. It's one of the things where you can ride the trip and find a lot of beauty in this low country spring, waking up all along the way. Lots of gators to be heard. And toward the end, you'll be able to see pretty much exactly where you've been. And it's a wonderful sense of accomplishment. Next month, there'll be a whole bunch of stuff going on. Rebecca Fanning is going to lead a trip to the Sandhills, Longley Sandhills hike. And then she's going to take you out to the Wagner Terrace garden tour of native plants. And toward the end of the month, there'll be a kayak trip on Wamball Creek. And what's not listed there that I forgot to add is that we will have a trip to the material recovery site, the Charleston Recycling Center, on the 23rd, which would be a Tuesday. So they don't open on weekends, but that'll be announced in more detail next month. And we continue the tradition begun by John Muir at the founding of the party to take people out into the world and show them what's out there. So join us early and often. And I'm done.
Thank you, Star. So that picture up there, that's at, what's the name of that place again? Donnelly. Oh yeah, it says it right there. So that dike that everyone is on, we were walking down the dike and that big crowd went and they were gone off the dike. And then I was waiting for some people and then we caught up. And as we're walking down the dike, actually, David, you were with me.
I'm slow.
You could hear alligators on either side of the dike as we came up to them, and they were just rumbling in the water on either side of the dike. It was really intimidating to walk down that dike because it's pretty long, but it was cool too. It was just a really nice day. All right, so the action alert this month is just education on how to take action. So we're not asking you to do anything in particular, but we are asking you to reach out on any topic that you want to your state senator. So we've got, our state senators listed, Graham and Scott. And then, why do you want to call your senator? Because calling your senator really does make a difference. You can also write, you can also email, but we've got the information here about calling. So if a senator gets 10 to 20 calls a month about a topic, it could get on their briefing. So how do you make that call? It's best to call the local office, and we've got the phone numbers listed. And we'll have this in our newsletter. So that'll be there. So call the local office. Whether you get the answer machine or a staff person, give your name and address so that they know you live in their district. That's really important. Tell them why you've called, the overall topic, be it septic tanks or trees or Ukraine or whatever, just pick a topic and give it a whirl, try it. That's what this is all about. And if you leave a message, ask them to call you back so that you can really have a good conversation with a staff person. Sometimes, talking to the staff person, you can learn a lot about, what they're thinking. And so, if they have time, they will talk to you and they'll give you all kinds of information. All right. So, when you get an action alert on a national issue, call immediately. Don't wait around because, we don't know when they're going to vote on this. They might be voting on it that day. They might be voting on it that week. But the sooner they start hearing from people, the better. Again, practice it. Call on any topic. Call this week, next week, and just give it a try. And then put the phone numbers in your cell phone. So, I've got it listed under Senator Graham, Senator Scott, and all I have to do is, go right in. So then I don't even have to fumble trying to find the phone number. It's just there. So anyhow, that is our action item this month. It's just to give it a whirl, try to call your senators and get this information in your phone. And when we alert you about something to talk to them about, then you know how to do it. You're ready to go, and we will make a difference. We'll make an even more difference than we would have. All right. Next month, we're before we get to our speaker tonight, we've got Charlene Johnson, She's going to be talking about gardening for wildlife with native plants. Charlene is a native plant expert. She is a low country person and she knows exactly what's good for our yards here. And she's going to be giving us the skinny on all of that. All right, tonight. So we've got septic tanks in the coastal zone and Riley Egger is here to speak. She is a land and water and wildlife program director for the Coastal Conservation League. And she holds a BS in ecology, evolution, and animal behavior from the University of Texas at Austin. That's a great place. Yay. But you had fun in Austin. Yeah. And she previously worked at the Southern Environmental Law Center and the National Wildlife Federation. So welcome, Riley. Thank you. Let me try to get rid of this thing first. Okay. All right, and this one, I'm supposed to just move up there?
Yep.
Just hit slideshow? I think it's.
There you go.
Perfect. Great.
Alrighty. Well, howdy y'all. Thank you for having me. I am not as charming as the lovely Miss Leslie Linhart, but I will do my best to make septic sound sexy. But Riley Egger, I direct the Land, Water, and Wildlife Program at the Coastal Conservation League. I've been at the league for about 4 years now, and I focus primarily on water quality and wildlife issues. And one of the kind of emerging topics that has really been having a lot of attention in the media, and I think our communities are feeling the impacts, is what's happening in our coastal systems from the pollution from septic tanks. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the pollution itself, the scope of it, and also just offer some solutions and some of the things that we're doing with our partners to try and address it. Before I get into that, if you haven't heard about the Coastal Conservation League before, we are a 501c3. We're a nonprofit. We work in policy and advocacy. We have 4 different offices. We're headquartered here in Charleston, and we have a land, water, wildlife, a communities and transportation program, an energy and climate program, and then a food and agricultural program. We also have offices in our South Coast, and like in the Beaufort area, and in the North Coast, like Myrtle Beach area, and then an office up in Columbia. But we primarily focus on the coastal zone and work with partners to come up with kind of comprehensive solutions to pressing environmental problems in the Lowcountry. So, what is the coastal zone? How many people can name the 8 coastal counties? I'm gonna ask y'all to try.
Beaufort,
Charleston.
Beaufort.
Yeah. Can anyone name all 8?
Georgetown?
Somebody said Georgetown, right?
Yeah. We have Jasper, Beaufort, Colleton, Charleston, Berkeley, Dorchester, Georgetown, and Horry County.
Dorchester's considered.
Yeah, Dorchester is a coastal county. And so, but it's not a, when we say like coastal zone, we're not talking about just like the beach communities or, even just like, half a mile, from the beach, where it is a regulatory definition, the coastal zone. And so these are the 8 counties in which DHEC takes extra review for the activities that are happening within our coastal zone. And that's from the Office of Coastal Resource Management, OCRM, who issues critical area permits, and then CZC, coastal zone consistency permits. And then septic systems. How many people, and I promise I won't ask y'all too many questions, but how many people are on septic systems? Okay, so a number of y'all. The way a septic system works is essentially you have your main line. So you have your house, and then you have your septic tanks, which anything that goes down the drain. And this is for a conventional system, but there are a number of different types of systems. But for a conventional system, everything you put down that drain goes to this holding spot, liquids and solids. Then you have a drain field in which those liquids are able to kind of perforate through throughout this drain field and then leach through the soil, and that's what helps clean it. And that's what helps make sure that it's not contaminated before it reaches the groundwater. And this is just for a conventional septic system, but there are a number of different types of septic systems. And so here in South Carolina, we have this coastal zone, and we know that DHEC takes extra care into what happens within our coastal zone. And they do that through the Tidelands and Wetlands Act. And so they are required to basically review activities that are happening within the coastal zone to make sure that it's not going to be impactful on our environment. We are kind of like, in the coastal zone, getting things from multiple areas. It's kind of what we call like the coastal squeeze. So from one area, we're getting sea level rise, and we're getting the effects, and we're really on like the forefront of climate change. But then we're also kind of getting it from, the back end, and we're seeing an increase of development, an increase of those pressures. And so it's really kind of compounding factors within the coastal zone and putting a huge stress on our coastal resources. And for septic tanks, that's, a really big issue, because more and more people are on septic tanks. The number of septic tanks have increased throughout the years. And a lot of times people don't even realize when a septic tank is failing. So this is just an example, just pulled from, from Google, but this is, a drain field. And a lot of times people don't know their septic tank is failing until they're actually seeing the stuff on the ground. They're actually seeing, seeing it at like the surface. But we have, this is an uncovered septic tank, like on Folly Beach. And then this is in Virginia, and this little thing that's circled right here, like that's actually a septic tank. And so when we think about septic tanks, we know that, going back real quick, we know that we need to give septic tanks space. We know that in order for them to be able to properly function and properly maintain, we need this space, this filtration zone, before it actually leaches into our groundwater. And so what's happening here in Charleston and what's happening across the Lowcountry, we're having more and more flooding events. We're having more and more, we're seeing the effects of sea level rise and climate change. And so these are really kind of compounding on our wastewater infrastructure. So it's causing more and more septic tanks to fail. People who have been on septic tanks for years that maybe didn't have a problem before are having problems now. And then we're also seeing more and more septic tanks being placed within, like our coastal regions. Before you needed to, or a lot of the times, like if there wasn't the sewer infrastructure there, homes wouldn't be, these large tracts developments wouldn't be placed in these areas. But now we're seeing national home builders kind of come in and they don't care that the infrastructure is not there. And they're putting these insensitive places sometimes on, a third of an acre, and they're not considering the kind of realities of the dynamics of the coastal zone and considering what's going to happen in the future and what the future of those tanks look like. So I think from a resiliency standpoint, it's something that we need to be paying a lot of attention to, addressing the issues from, kind of two buckets: the existing septic tanks that we know already exist and that are in place, and how we can get more resources to help those folks have safe water infrastructure. But then also think about, where do we want to go? Where are we planning? Where are we planning to put these septic tanks? And are we kind of setting ourselves up for failure and future generations up for failure for water contamination? And so what are we going to do about it? Well, there's a number of things that we can do about it. And one of the things that we're working on right now, and where the Coastal Conservation League is represented by the South Carolina Environmental Law Project. Leslie Linhart is one of our brilliant attorneys, along with co-plaintiffs, Charleston waterkeeper Andrew Wonderly. And so what we're doing is we're basically saying, we're asking the court to tell DHEC that they have to consider the coastal zone when they do septic permitting. I talked about how we have this coastal zone, this regulatory definition, and DHEC has to have certain review because we're so sensitive and because we're so special. And they do that for every environmental permit except septic tanks, which is just kind of crazy when you think about it. They don't do it for individual septic permits, and they don't do it even for large tract developments. So a developer can come in and say, hey, I want to place 200 septic tanks right here, right next to the intercoastal waterway. And OCRM doesn't have the, right now they don't consider the Coastal Zone Management Act, and they don't have that extra level of review of what it means to be placing that many systems within the coastal zone. And so we went to court, and we're asking the court to force DHEC to do what their statutory authority, and to do that level of review and care, because our coast doesn't have the time to wait. In the meantime, while that plays out in court, we asked the court to also put a pause on large tract developments. So it's the ones that are from the national home builders, the ones that are trying to get permits, like for like the Onondaga and McClellanville areas. And we asked them to put a preliminary injunction and a temporary pause on those while the merits of our case play out in court. Unfortunately, the court denied our request for injunctive relief. And we're kind of seeing right now the consequences of what that actually means. A lot of folks might have heard about the White Track up in Onondaga. And the White Track is, they're looking to place over 200 septic tanks, and some on a third of an acre. And so that's moving forward because we were not able to get our preliminary injunction, and we're scared about like the on the ground effects that we can potentially see from that. But this was one of the opinion pieces from Faith Rivers James, our executive director, Amy Armstrong, and Andrew Wonderly, that we put in the Post and Courier about how we need to put a pause on these septic tank permits, because we're seeing the effects play out in real time, and it has some real consequences. So the other thing that we can kind of do, and the other thing that we need to do, is we need to take a look at our state permitting program and how we address septic tank permits, as a state, aside from just the coastal zone, which is extra special and dynamic, and it needs to have that extra level of review from DHEC OCRM. We're not the only place that is experiencing kind of like the pressure from septic tanks. They're a problem in Columbia. They're a problem in Greenville. And there are some kind of common sense things that we can put in place to help strengthen our septic tank permits, and to strengthen our resiliency as a state. One of the kind of, low-hanging fruits, or one of the things that is, seems very common sense, is we don't have any lot size requirement. So I mentioned for Onondaga and the White Track, they're placing it on a third of the acre. A lot of our neighboring states, they have a requirement that it has to be at least 1 acre. Greenville County recently passed an ordinance that says septic tanks have to be placed on 1.5 acres. But that's just one of the kind of common sense things that other states are doing that I think that South Carolina could really benefit from. The other thing that we would love to see is an increase in the vertical separation distance. And that's that distance that I pointed out between basically the septic tank and the groundwater. Right. Any guess right now in South Carolina how much distance you need right there? Someone throw out something. 10 feet. Any other guesses?
5 feet.
6 inches. 6 inches. And when you think about the flooding events, when you think about climate resiliency, when you think about like sea level rise, that 6 inches doesn't make a lot of sense. In other states, they have 12 inches. In other states, they even have, 3 feet. And we really are lagging behind in our regulations, and setting ourselves up for failure. Because even with that kind of level, even a septic tank that is under regulation and normally operates fine is still at risk of failure because of the increased flooding events. If it's within like a flood zone, with like sea level rise and climate change, we're setting even well-intended septic tanks up for failure. Because just to be perfectly clear, we are not against septic tanks. They've been a very, for decades, they've been an effective way to manage our wastewater infrastructure, and they are for rural communities. I think, what's really kind of compounding all these problems is seeing these national home builders come in and try to put 200, 100 septic tanks in these dense developments along sensitive areas. And so we need to kind of step up to the plate and try to address like these solutions. There's also things at the local level that we can be doing, and things that a lot of people are doing at the local level, which are pretty cool. For like maintenance and inspection, the city of Folly Beach, they have a point of sale inspection. So when you sell your home, you have to inspect your septic tank. You know, it kind of, you know, those common sense things that more and more local governments are doing because they're seeing like the impacts of climate change on the wastewater infrastructure and recognizing their vulnerability. Greenville County, as I mentioned, they have a minimum lot size requirement of 1.5 acres for a house that is like on a septic tank. We are sorry about that. We're seeing really, really like great things like happen there. And you know, even with like, you know, the town of Mount Pleasant, there is like an equitable component when it comes to septic tanks. For example, the Snowden community. The Snowden community, they are a settlement community, and they wanted to connect to the Mount Pleasant sewer line. But however, Mount Pleasant at the time, they had like an ordinance in place that said, if you want to connect to our sewer line, you have to annex into the town. And Snowden wanted to retain their sense of place. They wanted to retain the ownership of the land. And they didn't want to have failing infrastructure and annex into the town and lose that kind of like autonomy. And so they were able to pass an ordinance that says, okay, you can connect into the town and connect into the sewer line as long as you maintain just a one residential equivalent unit. So basically you can have your house there, but you can't have a huge condo there. So there's innovative things that more and more local municipalities are doing to get people off of failing septic tanks and onto a program that allows for kind of safe infrastructure. Another, you know, thing that I would love to see more municipalities doing is kind of taking a leading role in inspections and in maintenance. I think education is a huge part of it. A lot of people don't realize that they're on they might even be on a septic tank. You know, no one really pays attention to their water bill, and they don't realize like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not paying for sewer, like, you know, anymore. And so I think educating people about if they are on a septic tank and educating people about what it actually takes to properly maintain the ones that we actually have is really kind of like a first step in the collective knowledge that we have to try to address some of these problems. And so that's really, this is, I think this might be Isle of Palms. But so I know I threw a lot of, you know, kind of like a lot out at y'all, but I would love this to be kind of, you know, a conversation and try and like answer some of the questions that you have. I think, you know, septic tanks are really, like I said, it's not like the sexiest topic to talk about, but it's a really, really important one. And here in South Carolina, we are drastically behind on our wastewater infrastructure, and we're really setting ourselves up for failure, both now and for future generations, because so much depends on our water quality. People know, you know, when you're here in South Carolina, you don't go and swim in the creeks after it rains. Yeah, Nina knows that. You don't go and swim in the creeks after it rains because you know that it's going to be flooded, because even properly maintained systems are failing because our regulations aren't stacking up to the realities of living in such a dynamic area. But thank y'all for letting me present and talk, and happy to answer any questions y'all may have.
Questions in the room?
I'm assuming we have a rising water table in these coastal counties. What happens when that water table interacts with the drain fields?
That's a failure. That's a failure of the septic tank.
But then what? I mean, you have to go on city, you have to have infrastructure, pipes, right? You have to have sewer systems.
You know, a lot of these places, the sewer infrastructure isn't there. In some cases, it might be there and folks can pay that tap-in fee. But I think a lot of people don't even realize their septic tank is failing. You know, just because sometimes it's visible, but a lot of it is you know, under the ground and you can't quite see it necessarily when it's failure. It's not as, you know, prevalent when, you know, like it was like the picture I showed from Folly, when one was completely uncovered because of the changes from, you know, the sea level rise and uncovering that actual system itself. But a lot of times that infrastructure isn't there. And I think a lot of people don't even realize their septic tanks are
What
failing.
does the homeowner do?
If their septic tank is failing. So there are other systems right now, like, you know, there's a mounted system, which that kind of increases the vertical separation distance. So it's basically like putting it on, it's mounting it. So it's like raising it up. So you're building it on a higher kind of structure. But you know, there's advanced engineer systems. But I think that we need to kind of consider also like, where can we expand sewer lines in a smart way? Because if a tank is going to repeatedly fail, do we really want someone to live there? And do we want that kind of pollution that's going to be trickling into our waterways? And how can we help them? There's not like a one size fits all kind of solution. And that's, I think, one of the challenges when it comes to addressing our infrastructure.
So when they ask a question, can you repeat it?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes.
There's been several articles about subsidence along the East Coast.
Mhm.
I mean, apart from sea level rise caused by climate change. There's also been subsidence, and part of that is because of development. And Charleston County evidently has a larger than average subsidence.
Mhm.
Part of that is development. One of the consequences of this is evidently problems with septic tanks, because you're losing groundwater and so the land is slowly sinking. So I mean, how does this factor into how you're working with septic tanks and working with the state and trying to change laws and regulations and policies?
Yeah, so the question was, how does land subsidence play a factor in how we address kind of like septic tank problems? And I'm not familiar with septic tanks causing the subsidence. I know that groundwater.
It's not the septic tanks that are causing subsidence. Subsidence is causing problems with septic tanks.
Yes, okay. Yeah, so it's causing problems with septic tanks. I mean, that's why we need that vertical separation distance. You know, when we only have like those 6 inches, that doesn't give us a lot of buffer and doesn't give us a lot of wiggle room for when we are, you know, slowly, you know, subsiding. But I think it's just one of the many factors that kind of points to why we need a more kind of comprehensive approach to where we're placing these septic systems. If we're placing them in.
Waking up to these facts.
You said our agency is waking up to this fact? I think it's been more and more in the kind of public realm. I think more and more people are aware of what's happening and are aware of the problems that's causing, not only for us now, but the problems that we're really kind of setting up for future generations. I think it's gonna, you know, it's a multi-pronged problem of, we need more education, we need funding, we need, you know, a maintenance program, we need proper planning. So it's a multi-pronged problem, and that's going to involve a multi-pronged solution. So it's not all just on, you know, DHEC. It's not all just on like local governments. It's not all on the property owner. I really think it's going to take kind of like, you know, it takes a village, and a comprehensive solution is going to require a lot of, you know, stakeholders like at the table.
Are they?
Well, I think there was some movement on Shem Creek.
Yeah, I think there's a lot
Talk
of,
about that as an example of
Shem
what
Creek?
can happen.
I mean, they're, in terms of like, are they coming to the table for, I don't think, you know, everyone is, you know, like we need comprehensive septic tank reform. We do. But I think it's a slow trickle, and we're seeing more people are stepping up to the plate. From like the state level, our regs definitely need to be updated, but there's a lot of cool things happening like at like the local level, such as, James Island PSD, and Mount Pleasant Waterworks expanding their sewer lines in a very strategic way to get people who have been repeatedly failing, have septic tanks that have been repeatedly failing and get them off of that. For Mount Pleasant, that's for like the Snowden community, and that also includes Shem Creek, which is one of the most polluted creeks for, fecal coliform. And so it's just like, the writing is in the water. And I think also Charleston Waterkeeper, who has been doing, water quality sampling and posting the, swim alerts to let people know when waters are safe to swim in and when they're not. So I think the more information that we get out there, people are paying more and more attention to it. We're seeing, like oyster beds near, Awendaw being shut down for harvesting, in part because of fecal coliform. So this isn't just impacting, one person, one body of water. It's really kind of perforating throughout our low country. And I think more and more people are paying attention
No
to
pun
it.
intended.
Is this a matter of agency asleep at the wheel, or is there a political component with not lobbying to keep forcing or cracking down?
So the question was if this is just kind of the agency asleep at the wheel, or if there's like a political component to it. I think, probably it's definitely like a little bit of both. When it comes to DHEC, that's why we had to go to court and say, hey, DHEC, you are supposed to be doing something. You have a statutory obligation to review septic permits for coastal zone consistency like you do every other permit, and you're not doing it. And we had to go to court and we are in court to force them to do that. So I think there's a component of that where we're not seeing them step up to the plate there. But we also know that, we're also in a housing crisis. And so we need more and more homes. I think it's just how we properly plan that and how we plan that in a safe way so it doesn't impact our coastal resources, and make sure that the infrastructure is there before we're dumping 1 million homes right on the Intracoastal Waterway. So does that answer your question? Okay.
And you talked about rain affecting the quality of water,
Mhm.
and flooding, all this sunny day flooding that we get is doing the same thing, flushing the coliform out.
Yeah, so the question, or it was about how tidal influences also impact like septic tanks. And I think, you saw that picture on, on Folly with that being like uncovered. We know that tides are rising, and that tidal kind of influence, especially when it comes with a lot of rain, is going to flood septic tanks. Like I said, we don't go in the creeks after it rains, and people know that for a reason. Because even if you can't see it, even if you can't smell it, it's there. So you don't want to be fishing in the creeks after it rains. You don't want to, send your children. And, I would never play in the rainwater. It's kind of scary to think about. But it is a factor with septic tank failures. And that's why we need even, like beach communities, they have a kind of, other problems as well that they have to think about when they're allowing structures on like these barrier islands, because as the tides rise and as land disappears because of that coastal erosion, we're going to see more and more septic tanks, fail.
I think you had a question?
Mine's kind of a follow-up to this. I'm like your notes, but transplant. So I was unaware of the cautions regarding the water. I did read in the local newspaper last month that 80% of new housing being built in Charleston is under the guise of HOAs. So I hear you talking about how there's some maybe systemic failure of governmental agencies on a state level to actually play the role they need to. I'm a transplant from Cincinnati, where there's a lot of breweries and distilleries, and we talk a lot about how important quality water is and how it affects the output of the product. Reality is private interests play an outsized role in private life, right? And so public advocacy and awareness is one thing, agency action is another. Thanks for enforcing that. Where are you seeing the most effective level or layer of pressure points to put on to make the private entities that get the right to develop the land incorporate more sustainable long-term policies and care about this, as well as the public, the pressure on private governmental agencies to prioritize water quality long-term?
So her question was basically like, how do you get the right pressure to the right people to be able to, like make effective change? I think, at the local level, like we are seeing those really cool projects going forward, but a lot of it is also have to do with, local zoning. And that's why comprehensive planning is so important. Local zoning laws are so important because that dictates where we build and where infrastructure, like is able to go. Sewer lines are costly and they come with their own set of problems as well. A lot of historically, sewer lines were kind of seen as, extending sewer lines were kind of seen as a bad thing in the conservation community, because in our minds, extending the sewer lines meant that we were going to see an increase in development and that we were going to see more and more homes being put in these sensitive areas. And now we're kind of seeing, these national home builders, they don't care that the infrastructure isn't there. They're coming in anyways and placing all these really dense developments in really bad spots. And so I think when we're addressing septic issues, it's those two buckets. It's what are we going to be doing about the ones that we already have? The people we already know are in jeopardy, the people that are already having that they need help. They need help to either have, equitable access, and maybe there's places where we do extend sewer lines. Maybe it is an education and outreach program. Maybe it's a maintenance program. And maybe there are places where, people shouldn't be because it's such a dynamic system and we're setting them up for failure by placing them in these sensitive areas. But then it's like, the other hand is like, what are we doing about the future? What are we doing about the ones that are coming in? And that's where the local planning really comes into play, and making sure that these developments are really scrutinized and that they have a plan, that when we place septic tank permits, we're incorporating the realities of sea level rise and not just thinking about what's going to happen in the next year, but what's going to happen in the next 50 years. What floodplain are they in? Is there plans for, proper infrastructure there, or is there a plan for maintenance for like these folks? So it's, what are we doing for the folks that are already failing? And I think that it's more and more funding and more local people stepping up to address those through extending the sewer lines in proper way, through funding. But then it's like local municipalities have a role to play in where they decide to permit these large developments, because they're just going to keep on coming.
So there's a question from online. What would it cost the developer and Allendale to provide sewer service for the white development versus 200 septic tanks?
Ooh, what would it cost for the town of Allendale to extend sewer lines and for the white track? I do not have a figure on that, but I think the white track is a really good example of where we shouldn't be placing septic tanks. And we did, for the white track in particular, 44 individual septic tanks were released from, or were permitted because they come in kind of batches from DHEC, and along with South Carolina Environmental Law Project, we requested final board review of those permits. So we basically asked the DHEC board to take a hard look at these, and we're seeing them being denied by DHEC to not take another look at it. And I think that we're trying to weigh our options on what's the best way moving forward. But we know that those permits in particular they don't consider the Coastal Zone Management Act. Allendale has recently voted for a moratorium on development, but that's not going to impact the white track. So I definitely don't have a financial figure for them, but I do think that that's one of the kind of poster childs of problematic developments that we're seeing.
So, once DHEC permits these things and they're put in, do they ever get inspected?
There's no requirement. There's no requirement for them to be inspected, and there's no requirement for maintenance. And that's another area that either local municipalities can take, but it's also a gap within our state regulations.
Because this person is saying that they do require inspections of irrigation systems.
But not septic tanks.
Yeah, that's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and
irrigation's clean water, right?
Yeah, not of septic tanks. And there's even like a big problem of people don't even know, a lot of people don't know that they're on a septic tank, and we don't even really know the true prevalence of them, because DHEC throws away the permits after 5 years. So if you if you tried to go to DHEC and say, hey, DHEC, can you show me where all the septic tanks have been in South Carolina and when they're where they're placed? DHEC wouldn't be able to tell you. And so I think that's why people don't know, like sometimes people are even like connected to sewer and then all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, it's, you know, a big flooding event comes and why is there sewage in my yard? It's because they used to have a septic tank there and people don't even know. So that education and like awareness piece is a big component of, I think, you know, trying to make effective change.
So what's the smallest piece of property you can have and have a septic tank?
There's no minimum lot size requirements.
Really?
There's no, that's why we're saying them as like a third of an acre. A third of an acre, you know, in some places even like, you know, a fourth of an acre. There's no minimum lot size requirements. And the most common kind of failure for septic tanks is that drain field. Because, excuse me, drain fields have to be, you know, properly maintained. And if that soil isn't of the right kind of, like the right standard, then it's going to continually fail. And if it's, you know, ideally, these drain fields will move around every, you know, X amount of years, but when you're placing them on a third of an acre, fourth of an acre, there's not a lot of room for movement.
Yeah, because I mean, a third of an acre includes the house, the driveway and everything else.
Yeah.
So it's not really a
Impervious.
third of an acre for the septic tank.
Impervious surfaces, and that also, you know, some people are on septic tanks and they're on well water. So what are we doing? What's happening to those folks? Is, you know, is a huge issue. Yes.
In all your conversations and research about septic tanks, is anyone talking about down drain field planting or like any kind of nature-based solution to suck up those nutrients and treat it?
That's not something I've, you know, heard of. But I would love to, if you have any, you know, resources, would love to look into it. You know, I think nature-based solutions, you know, could play a role in helping some of the pollution, but without these kind of basics in place, it's not gonna, you know, help comprehensively solve the problem.
Like palliative care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
To that point, a small deviation, my last job was at a major chemical manufacturing facility and we did take some protections around the waterway that affected our 39-acre campus, and do some wastewater management treatment of the Meadowlands habitats as well. And it did reduce measurably our output of waste in the waste out in the water that was the surface level that would fall off. You know, you have to treat it if it wasn't gutter or surface or anything. If it doesn't directly go from the roof into a gutter, you have to treat this wastewater management site. So one way we would protect the runoff into the creek would be through diverse biodiverse field plantings, and it was noticeably effective.
Yeah, and I think that
it's not large scale, some things.
yeah, and I think, you know, going back to, you know, we're not anti-septic tank. A lot of it's a very effective and, you know, preferred kind of solution for people, and especially like rural areas who, you know, the reality is some people might never get that sewer infrastructure out there just because of like the remoteness of that. And so maybe like on a smaller scale, those kind of like innovative nature-based solutions could help play a role. But I don't think when it comes to, you know, the large tract developments, it's gonna, you know, be an effective kind of solution.
Do you know what happened to that tank?
I'm assuming that they moved it.
Oh, okay.
I'm assuming that they moved it. Yeah, it was
That's
uncovered, but yeah, it's kind of crazy. And the one from, I don't know if you can go to the one from like Virginia, but
I'm gonna put the mouse up here. Put the mouse on this one.
yeah, but this one is always just, you know, this is like up in Virginia and really kind of sticks out to me because it shows how, you know, wastewater infrastructure issues are climate issues and that we can't ignore them because we're going to see this happen if we don't step up to the plate.
Yeah, national firms have very few ties to places they work. And their long-term planning structure is usually 5 years, maybe 10 years if you're lucky. So I mean, why would they worry about a 50-year time structure? What kind of pressure can you put on them to think about something that is, you know, 3 generations of CEOs away.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a hard part when we know that the people that are building, you know, these large tract developments don't care about the land. They don't really care about what's going to happen like in the future. And while it's really unfortunate, I think that the pressure is really kind of on local governments and it's on DHEC to try to put the right safeguards in place to protect the people of South Carolina and to protect their residents. So that comes from zoning, that comes from planning. You know, we have a newly established Office of Resilience, which, you know, I'm really looking forward to seeing like the innovative work that, you know, that they help accomplish, but we need to think about what's going to happen in those 50 years, because the reality is like the national home builders, they're not the ones who are the stewardships of the land. It's the people who live here.
Is DHEC gonna do anything about the Mount Pleasant homeowner that built the seawall illegally?
I know that the Isle of Palms,
Or I don't know.
yeah, I know that they have gone to court to enforce it, and I believe the last I know is there's a countersuit from that homeowner. But DHEC has moved forward with enforcing that.
Sort of suspended regulations about seawalls that are not approved.
They have done a temporary emergency ordinance rolling back their regulations on seawalls, but the property in question where it's at is within DHEC's jurisdiction anyways, not within the Isle of Palms.
Anybody ever talks barrier islands are by definition. Like,
Yeah, sand moves, and they are dynamic systems. Yeah, it's an unfortunate is a light word to use, but DHEC is enforcing it within the port.
Well, it's only going to take another Hurricane Hugo and those seawalls aren't going to amount to anything anyway. And they're going to learn the hard way. They'll learn the hard way.
Water, yeah, water doesn't really obey our laws.
Or the wind.
Or the winds, or the wind, or the
You can't
sand.
build a wind wall. All right,
Any other questions?
so I don't see any other questions. Let's see. Wait a minute. What is the criteria for becoming an officer with DHEC? It sounds like we need to have a clean sweep of the officials.
To be an officer of DHEC, I don't know the exact criteria, but I think that, you know, DHEC is splitting up. They're splitting up by July of this year between the, you know, Department of Health and then the Department of Environmental Services. And I think, you know, part of it is DHEC is only kind of bound to the regulations that they have in place. And sometimes, you know, we do have to go to court to tell them to do the right thing. And in this case, we don't think that they're doing a good enough job at taking a look like at our septic tanks. But we also need to be able to make sure that we are properly funding our resource agency, because if we're not doing that and they're not able to retain the staff, then we're really setting them up for failure and then setting us up for failure as well. So I think it's kind of like, you know, twofold. It's making sure that they have the regulations in place, but then they also have the resources that they need to carry out the job that they're tasked to do. Because if they don't have that, then we're the ones who suffer.
So who do they get their resources?
State allocated.
Yeah, so like when Nikki Haley was governor and she, that stuff, does any of that stuff come back during the master regime?
I don't have the specifics of, you know, DHEC funding at the top of my mind, but it is something that's, you know, state allocated, and different programs are often, you know, allocated as well. So they have, you know, their general kind of fund, but then certain programs, you know, might have, you know, a little extra money from like a proviso within like the state budget. But it is hard for DHEC, and it is, you know, when they are stopped with kind of mandates without having the resources to really properly enforce them. But, you know, in this case, I think that we need stricter regulations, and we are falling behind. And that's not even just, you know, my personal kind of, you know, like opinion. When you look at what other states are doing, 3 feet separation distance, you know, acre minimum lot size, considering considering climate change is even something that, and that Virginia recently like passed a bill that says like they have to consider, like climate change and the resiliency of it when septic tanks are being permitted. How that plays out, I think we're so curious about. But I think that the regulations on place are just, not sufficient for the realities of what we're seeing within like the coastal zone and across the state. And that's why we're having local municipalities like step up to the plate while our state policy plays catch up.
And thinking about funding, I know that some of DHEC's funding comes from fees on different things that people do. So maybe there could be a fee on people placing a septic tank that could help pay DHEC to monitor all that. It would make sense, to have the people using the septic tanks pay for that monitoring, at least a portion of it.
That made me think about what is the fee currently to get a permit?
Ooh, that's a good question, and I'm not too sure, but I think it's like $100, but I wouldn't quote me on that. It's not a large amount.
It's not enough, is what it sounds like.
It's not a large amount.
Yeah, I mean, when you buy a tire, you pay a fee. And then that money goes to DHEC and they put it around the state to help deal with tires. The disposition of those tires, where are they gonna go? Because they can't go in a landfill. So.
But with the funding piece, it's not all, about, DHEC needs the funds to carry out like their job, but it's also, like on the ground groups are also doing great things such as, I mentioned a couple times, Mount Pleasant, like waterworks, and James Island's PSD is, extending sewer lines in like a meaningful way. Edisto Island, like Open Land Trust, I know is also having, like they have, down there, like a septic tank kind of like maintenance program, and they're working with communities directly, to get like, the septic tanks inspected and maintained when, for those who lack the, the resources to be able to do it, because it can get expensive, especially if your septic tank has completely failed and you need a new drain fill and you need an advanced system and like a mounded system or a more advanced system, like those add up. And so we don't want to leave people with, a problem without the resources to fix them. And that includes like individual homeowners that lack the resources to be able to properly address it, because that pollution ends up going to our water, which is a public trust resource. And so we all kind of have like a role to play to help those individuals.
Just a personal opinion, I think national home building need national rules. State rules are just.
National home builders,
What?
the national home builders try to get the rules to help them.
I mean,
So they lobby pretty hard for that.
I mean, isn't y'all's action to reach out to your federal legislator? So could be something.
Yeah, that could be call your senator moment. Okay, well, thank you, Riley.
Yes, thank y'all so much.
Thank you for everyone online and thank you for everyone in the room. Next month, come and meet Charlene Johnson and hear all about gardening in your front or backyard with native plants. Thank you.
Contact.